Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the next episode. Today we're going to be talking about teenagers, young people as they go through teenage years. We spoke in the last episode about babies and infants and some of the role of parents and the rights of the children. And today we're going to be talking about how sometimes how challenging it is for parents and also for young people themselves. Certainly for us in the UK here, we're living in a minority situation. We're not living in a country which maybe sometimes facilitates and makes it easy. But obviously realising that actually some of the Muslim majority countries, some of these challenges are there as well. So I think we're just going to explore some of that. I'm a mother, I've got 4 children, as I've said before, and I have one who's a teenager, one who's kind of approaching teenage, he's 12, and some of the questions and challenging aspects of their lives and how they present those to me. I mean, I think the sort of transition from being a child into an adult is challenging. Actually, if we look back into the history and some of the teachings from the time of the Prophet, things were slightly different just in terms of society, but also in how they dealt with this stage. And I'm not sure that they actually put the same emphasis on it in the same way that we do now. So I think in the past, when I've read some of the teachings, I realised that actually it was kind of more natural. They obviously realised that there were challenges and that a young person was growing from a child to an adult, but I think the situation we're in now is actually very different to then. So what we can do is look back on that. We look at on the Quran, we look at the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then we look, of course, of the people around him and how they dealt with these situations. But then we need to really think about our own lives and how we apply all of that. So I think for a young person growing from a child to an adult, there's this whole kind of area in between which can take a few years for them. And of course within that there are challenges for them, but also as parents we have certain responsibilities and certain things that we need to teach them. We need to be able to help them to understand who they are, to help them to grow and develop, to give them that space, but also to really provide boundaries and a framework for them to live by. And as I've said in previous shows, this isn't always easy. You know, when you become a parent, you kind of hope that somehow somebody will give you a book of what to do, and actually it just isn't quite as easy as that. So I think for when a young person is going through puberty and their bodies are changing and their hormones are developing and things are happening for them, it's really important for us as parents to give them space to go through that process, which we know is difficult sometimes. Now I think Islam gives us the guidelines and is very clear on certain things. So for example, talks about how girls and boys should be kept in separate beds from a certain age, and how you need to make sure that the interaction between girls and boys is there, but that it's done in a certain way and is respectful, and there's a natural feeling of keeping themselves private between each other and these kinds of things. And it's important that we don't just presume that young people will understand this and that we have to actually teach it to them and help them to understand it. So I never feel that any of these things are black and white, because if it was black and white then we wouldn't have any problems in the world necessarily, and of course we do. And so we have to look at our environments and where they're being brought up and how that relates to them, what kind of schools they go to, the kind of friends they have. And these are all things that really come down to the responsibility of the parent initially to create the right places. So for example, if a child is going to a school which is better, which has got a better environment, which has got better sort of people around them, then you're more likely to get a situation where the young person has friends who are good for them, and people around them that are better for them than maybe people around them who aren't. So I think these are all the kinds of things that parents can do. When it comes to dress and how to conduct themselves, I think these are, again, challenging. I never feel that it's something I can order my children to do. I think what I have tried to do is to discuss things with them, to remember that they aren't me and I'm not them, and so they have to also make some of their own decisions as well about their life as they become an adult. So I have to understand what my faith is ideally teaching. For example, prayer. So actually encouraging your children to pray with you, to actually teach them how to pray, and to help them to develop that as a habit. All of these things come through childhood and then become even more important as they become teenagers and then into adulthood. Because of course certain things like prayer have become an obligation on them, we believe, in a way that they wouldn't have done when they were children. But if you start to just introduce it completely new in teenage or adult life, then it becomes harder to develop a habit. And I've certainly learnt from my own experiences, some of which I would have done better than others, where you have to actually develop a certain habit in all of us for it to become much more natural and much more part of our lives. And I think with teenagers, if you start to sort of try and force or implement certain things that they don't feel ready for, that can also be challenging. And I think the generational issues between parents and their children have been there for centuries. It doesn't matter if people are Muslim or not. Those kind of generational differences where young people feel that they know everything, that their parents don't know anything, and how does the parents relate to the children? These issues are very, very common. And I think as parents we can sometimes be very harsh on ourselves and not necessarily acknowledge that that's general, but always think it's us that have specific problems and nobody else does. And I suppose I'm here to say that actually as parents we all struggle and go through certain challenges with our young children, and then as they grow into adulthood, and we have to just be not so harsh on ourselves, but look at, okay, what's happening and how can we help them and how can we make our environment at home better. So I think in terms of dress even, for example, I think you give the children the guidelines, you explain to them the reasoning and the rationale behind all of these things. So if it comes to girls and talking about how they should be more modest and how they should cover up and how that then compares with what they maybe see outside, I think the approach to that, certainly for us here in a situation where lots of people they come across won't be Muslim, is about trying to help them to understand what modesty is and why it's important and why they should be protecting and looking after themselves. But it does partly need to be something they feel they understand rather than just be prescribed to them, because I've seen examples where people are told what to do or told what to wear, have no understanding of why they're doing it, and then it becomes a real issue for them later on because they just don't understand it or they don't feel it's part of their faith or their way of life. So I think we have to be always looking to develop them as an all-round young person, let them make their own decisions, but actually be there to guide them and show them and teach them, and sometimes tell them off if we need to as well. I've also learnt that you're not always going to be your child's best friend, and sometimes if we think that we always need to be keeping them happy and pleasing them, that won't work either. So I think we have to look at these issues. This period of life for a young person is very, very crucial for them in how they then move into adulthood. And they will go through phases where they are finding it more challenging than other times. And we have to just be there to help them and be their friend. I was asked recently by my son about a question that was related to pornography. And clearly he didn't understand what that was, but he actually asked it because he'd heard someone else ask. And for some parents, for a child to ask that question to them can be challenging in itself because they don't feel that they can want to ask or talk about these issues. But our approach in my household has been actually the more you have an environment where the children feel they can ask you, they're much more likely to ask you than they are to then go and ask somebody else who won't give them the right answer. So I think these kind of topics around relationships or the kinds of things they see in society or things between men and women, girls and boys, etc. If they feel that they've got a safe space at home to ask their parents or maybe their other people in the household, that's a safer space for them than actually just asking it at school or asking it somewhere else. So I think everyone has to develop this atmosphere in their own home in a way that works for them. But I always encourage Muslim parents to actually be open about these topics about sexual relations and intimacy between men and women. These are not things that we have to shy away from and hide. We have to be able to be open, respectfully talk about these things in a way that fits in with what our faith teaches us. But if we hide away from them or we see them as somehow shameful, we then develop other problems later on. And I think in the teenage years, this is the crucial time when they will have questions, and they will need to be helped in their understanding of what their faith teaches, what society is maybe telling them which might be opposite to that, and how they then manoeuvre their way through all of that to be the best person they can be. Okay, so I think one of the challenges, certainly, especially for girls, I think, but it's for boys as well, but I think for girls is this idea that they see certain imagery, and everything now is so image-based. So everywhere we go, everything we see on TV or in the streets is very much sort of sexualized, and is very much about imagery and how you always have to sell something by using the image of a woman. And I think for me, certainly with daughters, one of the things I've tried to do is to get them to ask themselves what they think is wrong with maybe some of this, and how women are used as objects, and how some of the imagery they see on TV, how that's not good for women, and that actually have to dress in a certain way does not mean that you're better than somebody, and that actually you need to start thinking about why would women want to do that, because it's very much about pleasing men. So I think we're living in, certainly here I could say we're living in a very sexualized society, and it can be challenging, I think, for girls to think that they need to dress in a modest way or to not copy whatever they see around them, but at the same time feel comfortable with themselves and who they are, and really develop a confidence and a self-assurance that as a young woman they are important, and that they have a role to play in society. And of course it goes back to education and about how important that is for them, but also for them to realise and look around them and find other people that they can look up to. Now, whether those people are people from the past, and I feel that as Muslims and as girls, Muslim girls and women in living now, I don't necessarily think that all of our role models and the people that we aspire to necessarily all have to be Muslim. They don't all have to be women either. I think we need to always be looking for people who are inspirational, who've done things, who've lived a good life, who have helped others. And I was asked recently, I was giving a lecture, and all of us on the panel were asked one by one, who would your role model be? And I actually didn't know what to say. And the reason I didn't know what to say was because I couldn't think of one person that would be more of a role model or more inspirational for me than anybody else. And my answer on that day was that actually I have lots of different people. I have lots of people around me that I meet regularly, but I also have people that I look up to that have maybe done amazing things in history. Maybe they've stood up against injustice, or maybe they are people who stand up for sort of human rights. And I think we need to be constantly looking and learning from people like that, learning from their sayings, and really for girls to realise that they can aspire to be whatever they want to be, and that it doesn't matter what is going on around them, they need to be comfortable with who they are and feel strong about that, and actually develop into a person that they feel happy about. And I think there are lots of people in history who've been able to do that. We can look back at our sort of Islamic history and certainly see some of the strong female role models that we have there. And we should readily be talking about that, and also looking at how they did what they did in the times that they were in, and how they managed to achieve a lot, and how can we then use those examples and that inspiration to then bring into our own lives now in 2013 in Britain. And I think we can really we're lucky that we have that history and those amazing female Muslim role models. And how do we then relate that to now in our lives, and how do we match that with some of the more modern women who are living now or who've lived in recent years, who've also done amazing things. You know, I always take inspiration from women who are strong in terms of they've been able to stand up to others or to speak out or to deal with injustice, because I think it takes a lot of courage to do that. But I think people who've been able to do that have actually set the scene and made it possible for people like me and others to do whatever we do and to live a life that's that as it is. And so I think there's been women throughout all of that, and men as well. And I think men, for me, you know, I feel that my work is much stronger, and I'm much stronger as a person if I learn from and work with men and women and we're able to interact and do things together in a way that I think, and obviously we have a framework, we understand our boundaries, we understand our guidelines, but all of these kind of things need to be taught and shown, and actually, of course, live by example. So as a parent, we are constantly challenged to live by action speaks louder than words. So it's all very well to teach children, you need to read, you need to study, you need to pray, you need to fast, you need to do all of the things that we feel are part of our lives and are important. But if they then don't see us doing those things, how can we then expect them to really do it? Because I think if you live by example, that's got to be the best way. And action speaks louder than words, in the meaning, if you talk, you can talk a lot, but if you actually backing that up with action and actually doing it. So if you're telling your children that they need to pray and you become strict with them, then clearly they need to see you praying. They need to learn from you, but also they need to see your example. So the parents become the living, breathing example of how you live your faith within everyday life. And I think these kind of teenage years of moving from childhood to adulthood is a really crucial time where they're very impressionable and they're very much looking for answers to life and the meaning of life. And I think if we can give them an all-round understanding and develop them into a good young person that has, you know, a lot to offer the world, feels comfortable and self-assured, feels, you know, positive about being a Muslim and how the faith teaches that to them, then I think we're developing young people that can really go out and really make a difference. And they themselves need to become, you know, role models for others, whether that be in their school or whether that be in their in the rest of their lives. I think they need to see themselves as somebody who others can and should be able to look up to as well. Maybe people who are younger than them or people who don't have the same on offer. So there's no reason why anybody can't achieve anything. We're in a situation where people can achieve, and achievement is different things for different people. Achievement doesn't always mean, you know, success doesn't always mean money. Success certainly doesn't mean fame or glory or any of these things. It means different things to different people, but people need to feel self-assured, comfortable, confident about who they are. And I think for young people, and particularly young women, this can be a challenge. For women, I meet lots of women who are older who actually haven't developed this in a younger age, and they're finding it much more challenging at 30 and 40 to develop a feeling of feeling good about themselves, of having a relationship with Allah that they can that they feel comfortable with, and how they live their life. They actually find that much harder to develop. I think if we can start to develop these things in children through to teenagers and into adulthood, especially with women, I think we'll be in a much better position. And of course, that young woman, that woman then becomes the wife and a mother, if that's her course in life. And that puts her in a very good position to understand who she is, how she then relates to other people, and how she develops a home with the right environment then for her own children, so that she can then pass that on. Okay, so I think, I mean, we live in challenging times for all of us, for adults, for young people, for young women, for men. If we look at the young woman and what kind of preparation we can make for them to become a good person later on, so a wife who understands what her role is. I think for me, one really, really important thing about all of this is if the person understands who they are and understands and feels good about themselves, you're much more likely to be in a situation where the woman then is somebody who is a good wife, is a mother who is able to bring up her children in a way that's positive. If you have a young woman who has no self-esteem, who doesn't understand her role in society, who doesn't feel good about herself, I'm not sure that she will then become somebody who's positive, who's contributing, and who's really somebody who's giving back to society and is somebody that others can look up to. So I think the kind of self-confidence and self-assurance is really important, especially for young women. I think even more so maybe than young men, because I think that role of feeling comfortable, being a good mother, keeping the home as a sort of harmonious environment is hard. And, you know, if you're not feeling good about yourself, if you have a negative outlook on life, if you don't really have a sort of direct connection with your faith, if you're maybe not doing things for other people, then I'm not really sure that you can then become the person you need to be. You know, and we know that the Prophet and through the Quran, it teaches all the time about education. And what do we mean? Education does not mean necessarily going to school and getting exams and qualifications. Of course, that's one aspect. But education for me is about an all-round education and an all-round understanding of the world, understanding other people around them, and how do we mix and match. And for me, there's no clash between learning about your faith and that aspect, and then learning about life and some of the other skills that you need. I honestly feel that they are fully compatible, and you're able to maneuver and mix and match with all of it. So if, for example, you develop a speciality in psychology, for example, and understanding other people, that's very much, you can very much fit that within your understanding of your faith, what it teaches, and how that becomes part of your life, and how you then live life, live Islam in a day-to-day world. So I think we need to really prepare girls to have a connection with their faith, to understand what the teachings are, but not in a black and white kind of list of do's and don'ts, of course not, but actually what it teaches them, how does that develop them into the best person they can possibly be? How can they spend their time wisely? How can they be learning and not wasting time on things that maybe aren't developing them? You know, and it's easy to do. It's easy for all of us to waste time. But I think there's a saying in this country that says, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And I think what we need to be doing is developing an atmosphere in the home and in our young people that then develop into adulthood, where they become active participants in life, and that needs to be driven by their understanding of their faith and what that teaches them, and then how they then take that out into the world as they become themselves wives, as they then become mothers, if that's what's planned for them, and how they then live with other people around them. And certainly in our context here, a really important aspect of teaching and understanding and education for our young people is how do they function as a positive British citizen who's Muslim, who's proud of who they are, what they believe in, but that is also part and parcel and fully functioning in this society as well. And that's a challenge for us. I see no clash whatsoever in being British and Muslim, and I think the young people need to help to understand that as well if they're struggling with that, but actually to really see them, right, okay, what does that really mean? I need to live my life as a faithful person who has a good connection with Allah and with the teachings of the faith, but actually how do we then take that to the other stage, which needs to become part of our life as well. So I think that's the challenge. It's not about putting things in boxes and saying this is a black and white way of doing things and a list of rules and regulations and do's and don'ts. I absolutely don't believe that helps anybody, and I don't believe that is how Allah wanted it. I don't believe that's how the Prophet lived, because I think there was always been diversity and allowance for people to have personalities and different ways of doing things, and of course within a framework that we feel we understand. So to develop that kind of self-assurance and that positive outlook on life in young people, I think is absolutely crucial. And you then develop people who are really positive citizens, who believe in God, who have a connection with the Quran, have an understanding of their rights and responsibilities, but in a way that's an all-round way of being, and an all-round way of being as a person who others look up to. You know, we have a real responsibility to the people around us in this country, and this is young people as well as adults as well, to really be the best people we can be, to really show Islam in a way that is positive, and to develop that in our young people is important. So just to summarise, to say that really, challenging for young people. They're in an environment which is hard for them. They are trying to manoeuvre their way through a society which is over-sexualised, which is full of imagery. And I'll see you on the next episode. Assalamu alaikum.